Welcome back to the Decarb Connect podcast. And this week, I've been very happy to entice back because she was a former speaker of ours, Alicia Eastman, who's the co-founder and president of InterContinental Energy. So we will be talking about a range of things, actually. InterContinental Energy has assembled this large portfolio of green hydrogen projects, which focus in coastal deserts and really is about mega-scale clean energy projects. So we'll be talking a lot about the conversion of green electrons into green chemicals and fuels, and looking at how InterContinental really kind of plans for both scale and also a healthy triple bottom line across their projects and portfolio. But I've kind of given that overview, Alicia, but tell us a bit before we dive in about how did you come into this space to begin with? Because I know you've come from a finance background, amongst other things, but just paint that picture for us, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the company and the portfolio as well.
Sure, and thanks again for having me on, Alex. This is great to be reunited. I'll give you a little background on myself, I guess, before we dive into the company. I grew up in the U.S. And I've spent the last 20 years based in Hong Kong and Middle East. I have always done pretty much international investment. For the most part, it was either project finance or private equity. I've done and when I say private equity, I mean growth equity and some kinds of mezzanine. I invested mostly in technology, specialty chemicals, in various new energies, new types of renewable energy. And when I did make those types of investments, I would usually go to people who were competent in that field or famous in that field to ask their advice. And it's just typical due diligence that you do on projects. And one person that I worked with a lot, and my partners worked with a lot, was Alex who was the co-founder of the company. And having known him for a long time and knowing how bright he was, he had noticed that there was a great need for low-cost renewable energy in places that typically did not have such low-cost renewable energy, and yet there was an abundance in places that had no consumer demand or no industrial demand. So he had thought about how do we connect these two? How do we get the lowest price renewables, which we know are feasible now? How do we get them to other locations that need them? And his first idea was to basically connect these super greens, as he would call them, which are coastal deserts, really large, flat coastal deserts that have a lot of sun during the day, a lot of wind at night, and connect all of that really, really inexpensive energy that you can get from having the constant input and connect it to another market. And his idea was undersea cables. Undersea cables had come a long way. They were much more efficient than they'd been in the past. And so he approached me about starting this company, and I thought it was a great idea. We put sort of our backgrounds and connections together, and we looked at the globe and said, where in the world is the best resource, and how do we get it to somewhere that really needs it? So we first focused on Australia and Oman. Oman, we knew, had a fantastic profile, and we also knew that Bombay was sitting right across the Arabian Sea with a great need for energy, renewable energy or any energy, in fact. So we looked at that as our first case many years ago, maybe 5 years ago, when we first set up the company in Oman. And Australia, we have the two projects there, which are basically the same concept. They're all very similar, and we recently announced our joint venture and project in Saudi Arabia. So to get from Iowa, where I grew up, to now London, I took a side track through Hong Kong and Middle East, GCC. I really have always enjoyed all of Asia, and particularly the Middle East. And now I focus on that part of the company for the most part, and a little bit of just the general external relations. While Alex is the CEO of the company.
But it's kind of interesting that you sit at this end of the spectrum of these massive renewables projects, and most of the time, for Decarb Connect, we're talking to industrials who are talking about, relatively small scale, sometimes on site, sometimes close by projects, and then of course more PPAs and things like that. But it's
Yes.
quite a different scale that you're going for, which of course has loads of kind of benefits, but must also kind of bring quite a lot of complexity to it. So maybe we could unpick that, and we'll start with the Oman project, because I think was that the first one?
The Asian Renewable Energy Hub in Australia was the first one that we announced, but
Oh,
it was only predated the Oman project by a little bit. So
okay.
we got started. They're basically around the same time. Yeah.
Let's pick on Oman and kind of have a look at what a classic intercontinental project looks like. And because of this scale, as I said, lots of opportunity from that, but clearly must take a lot more kind of levers and relationships in the early stage. So tell us a bit about who's involved in that. You've
Sure.
mentioned this kind of international opportunity for the offtake, but yeah, tell us about that project and again the mechanics of a mega scale project.
On one hand, of course, if something is bigger, you anticipate that it will be much more difficult to execute. And that is, of course, true. I mean, if it is much, much, much larger, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. But is it more difficult than doing 100 tiny projects? No, definitely not. We think that the permitting processes around the world are difficult for any project of any size. And if you are able to get one piece of consecutive land that you can monitor and you can do all of your assessments, you can get your permitting, you get your relationships, you have all of your stakeholders are all the same set of people, that's a lot easier than doing literally 100, 1,000, 100,000 of that. It's a lot like private equity. People think that the bigger the deal you do, the harder it is, but actually they're almost all difficult, and they're almost all require the same amount of due diligence, the same amount of planning, the same amount of everything. Only one of them gives you a much bigger return. One of them is much more efficient. And the reasoning for going large is really to get that efficiency, because we want to have that price down low enough to attract people to buy this product instead of buying a fossil fuel based product. This is how wind and solar took over. It's not because everybody decided to be kind and to have a greener attitude. It's because they actually became cheaper. They became a reasonable alternative, and in some cases, the least expensive source you can find. And that's what we want to do as well for fuels. We want to have an alternative that is in the ballpark, that is something that is around the same price. And if you make other alterations, you can actually future proof, and you can actually save money. If you don't go down this route, you will probably have more difficulty, well, with regulations and taxes and other things like that, but also just the ups and downs of fossil fuels. When you have a renewable based fuel, the price is always going down. So you have your project, your first phase, the second phase is going to be cheaper, the third phase is going to be cheaper. That's always true. But we are never going to look up and have no sun or no wind. It comes back every year. So that part of it doesn't dissipate. You don't lose the resource. And that means you have a lot of certainty about what your pricing is, because you have a 50-year project. I mean, it's very easy to predict what your cost models is going to be. And that means not only is the pricing coming down and getting closer, but it's consistent, and it stays in a place so people can actually plan around it. And I'm sure as you're aware, obviously the price of energy is a real headache for people. And it's almost, you really have no idea. It's capricious almost what the pricing is going to be. So this helps quite a lot.
So let's take a step back then. So for this particular project, when did it first kind of come up at a discussion, and what's been that kind of flow of time to where you are now?
So I think we first decided we wanted to do the project in Oman in 2015. I think we talked to a number of people. We thought about who would be the best partner for the project. At the time, there were three sovereign wealth funds in Oman, SGRF, or quasi-sovereign wealth funds. There was Oman Oil, SGRF, and Oman Investment Fund. And of the three of them, we knew that SGRF was headed by a really visionary type of investor. And we just decided to approach that group and see if they were interested in doing a project together. And this is when we thought we would build a large project to do an undersea cable to Bombay. And they got on board, and they were fantastic partners. And we looked at what parts of the land made the most sense. And we also brought in Enertech, which is a subsidiary of the Kuwait Investment Authority. So they came in. And then actually SGRF did a roll-up and acquired the other two parties that we had considered partnering with. So now they're all one group called Oman Investment Authority. And under Oman Investment Authority is all of the oil companies, Oman Oil and 9 others that were rolled together, which is now called OQ. So we very serendipitously got OQ as our partner that had all this experience in the downstream. We didn't partner with an oil and gas company originally. We partnered with the Sovereign Wealth Fund, but now we are partnered with OQ, and they have experience with ammonia. They've experience with a lot of the downstream, with sales, with a lot of things that are really relevant and helpful. So that was honestly, that was really a serendipity. So now we have both. We have OQ as a great partner, and then OIA is still involved and is very helpful. And KIA and Enertech are all extremely helpful and just fantastic partners to have in Oman. I think because we're partnered with a government entity, they're obviously very interested in in-country value, and that's something that we're very interested in as well. So our approach to the projects, having that triple bottom line, it's all about including all of the stakeholders. So it's not just the shareholders that benefit from a project. It's not just the economics that matter, but it's jobs, it's a community, it's environment, it's obviously the governance, all of the ESG factors as well. These all have to be considered and through the viewpoint of all the stakeholders. And by partnering with the government, you sort of inherently get that voice of all of the population around your projects and what is good for the country, what is going to grow for the country, all the ancillary businesses that we can have, the supply chain that we can build because our projects are so large. It's just a lot of benefits to having this size of a project and being able to plan it this way, together with the planning entity of the government.
So if I were looking at a kind of a map with you to understand the scale of this, what's the kind of land space that it fills, and also what stage is it at the moment?
We used to say that the size of it, so it's about 6,500 square kilometers or about 7,000 square kilometers, and that's about half of the size of Bali. But then we didn't want to say Bali because that sounds like you're ruining Bali or something, but Oman is one of the most beautiful countries in the world, but where we're putting the project is not that part of Oman. The part of Oman where our project is looks like the moon. It is completely flat. It is almost clay-like, almost no vegetation whatsoever. Really, it actually feels like you're walking on the moon when you're there, and you just don't see anything for miles and miles and miles, and you just don't see anything around you. But I have lost about 9 hats, just the wind speeds are so high.
That's a nice kind of painted picture of the sheer scale of it, which is kind of mind-boggling when you think about the average project scale that we're more often used to hearing of. And then in terms of like right now, what would you see? Where are you up to with the project's evolution?
Right. So you're going to see the monitoring equipment. So you're going to see basically just the turbine, the towers and the masts. You're going to see the solar monitoring equipment. Not a full build out. It's not under construction. FID for Oman is expected in 2025. So a lot of what has to be done before then is obviously the resource assessment, and we've been monitoring for since 2019. So we have quite a lot of data, and much more than anyone in Oman. And then you have your normal feed studies, all of the different types of things that you have to do to get assessed by third parties in order to have a financial close. So and you line up your buyers, you line up your financing. Everything is set for the first phase. And our first phase is likely to be something like 8 gigawatts would be most likely the first phase. And that would be the FID in 2025.
And off takers. So you sort of alluded to sort of lining up those off takers. What's the picture with that?
So the different projects have different likely first off takers, and you were in discussions with a few. I won't say who they are, but I think maybe by next year we will be announcing MOUs and then heads of terms and then actual off takes. But I would say that the two areas that are most interested and make the most sense are North Asia for power, because their plans are to replace coal with ammonia, basically to co-fire. And they can do that up to 20% with that really making no changes at all. And they're doing studies now to see if they can do 50% with very little modification. And that is the hydrogen roadmap for places like Japan and Korea. And then I guess globally, the big market is in the marine fuels. So a lot of these shipping companies that are at the sort of head of this, that are looking at maybe green methanol now and ordered ships now, they are also eventually expecting to use ammonia, because the green methanol is good because it's net zero, but the ammonia is zero. The ammonia has absolutely no, you don't have to have any greenhouse gases at all. It's a much simpler concept. Because it's entirely green, right? We don't have to deal with a carbon at any point. And so I think that is more satisfying as a solution, and you can actually cut your carbon a lot easier, a lot more easily if you take your big container ships, which aren't manned by very many people, and they're well-skilled people, and you can use ammonia as the fuel instead of fossil fuels, diesel, and very dirty other alternatives. So that, I think, is the most likely big buyer, which is mostly European. And also, I would say some North Asian as well. And there's definitely shipbuilding going on in Korea and also in Europe that are building ammonia ships, and that will be part of this whole chain. So we'll be very excited to see the first ammonia ship shipping ammonia with ammonia as its fuel.
Okay, so as you said, that it's in progress. 2025 is the year where things will be looking to come together. But I mean, having had that number of years and sort of bringing this project forward, how is that kind of informed what a kind of classic intercontinental project is going to look like? Because inevitably, that first project to really progress is the one that kind of tells you what works, what maybe doesn't, but also what's possible, what else you didn't. So what's come up during this process that is now going to inform the way that you work?
Well, I think that is right, but it's not really necessarily the first project that teaches you everything. I think what we have with the portfolio is the ability to learn from all of the projects. So we have this cross learning capability, and we use it all the time. So we do try to make mistakes only once and not do it again in the next project. So I think that's been helpful, and especially in planning stages, you have a lot more capability to influence changes, to make changes quickly, and to take a different tack. But we've been able to really sort of push the projects forward simultaneously and learn from one another, whether it's third-party providers of any kind of service or technology, or whether it's how we lay out the project. I mean, they are really almost identical versions of one another, because we chose land that is almost identical, and we have the same sort of setup. The only thing that's different really is the jurisdiction and the partners, and even in those cases, we're really trying to learn from that as well. And I think our Western Green Energy Hub, we were partnered with the traditional owners there. They own a part of the project, and they also have a seat on the board. And not only do we want to replicate that with any projects that we have with authentic traditional owners, and in term this Australian term for it, but there's other places in the world with indigenous peoples and people who have land rights. We would like to really have the project as a partnership instead of just a profit share or something where, in many cases in the past, they have not really benefited from the project as much as they should, given it's their land. And this is their land, and it's their project. And actually, with WGH, we are also handing the project to them at 50 years. So in 50 years' time, it is entirely theirs. So they may keep us on. I may still be alive. We don't know. but but the idea is that this lasts forever. We don't have to. That's such the beauty of this industry, is we don't have to deplete it. The resource keeps coming back, and you can continue to run this as a industry. And these, as partners, they have many years to train, to set up academies, to teach, to have people who know how to run the project, and when it's theirs, that they will be able to do it, which is great. And we think this is a great model, and so does Western Australia, for other projects, that this is the type of partnership that should be used in all of the cases, so that you have a much more fair relationship with traditional owners.
I can almost imagine like people out in the ether sort of nodding with the idea of, yes, it's better to do good business when you can, which is something we hear about a lot. Why is it that it's so important to you as part of the project mechanics? Why does that attention on local content, why is that so significant?
I'll give you a simple example. I mean, I think that just the sort of ethos that we live by is that if you just do the right thing in the beginning, it's easier for everyone. If doing the right thing is actually usually the more profitable thing. Doing the right thing is usually the least expensive thing. And you don't actually have to have this clash of, and yes, you could take every penny off the table, but generally speaking, if you actually think about things in a more fair manner, then you do less cleaning up and you do more just sharing and celebrating what you've made. And I'll give you just a couple of examples of how these large projects can take advantage of, also can do things that will benefit the community and the projects. So for example, having supply chain companies being built near the project saves a lot of money for the project, right? I mean, there's a lot of different efficiencies that you can create. Right now, people order their wind turbines from around the world, and they essentially have rolled up steel and they're shipping air. And you're paying a lot of money to ship air. Whereas if you have people on site that also would like to have jobs, you can have an assembly service which is basically rolling the turbines, and you can roll the turbines on site. It's also only possible because our sites are so big, and there's nothing there. So you can actually drive out any length. 220-meter turbine is no problem. You can drive it out and stick it up on the site. But by having this sort of more holistic view, where you have long-term industry attached to the project, you have better jobs and outcomes for people who are living there, and it's also cheaper for the project. Having a dedicated facility to make any kind of components, because the project is so large, people do want to have us in their order book, right? And they are willing to do a dedicated facility because they know that we will take up all of it. It's not a spec situation. So by having that capability, that means that we can also provide a long-term economy for the whole area around the project, as opposed to an extractive industry where we might, like, say, be mining for something. And I'm not saying mining is always terrible, but you can have terrible mining stories where you're extracting something, you're there for 6 years, and while the people are there, they're paying exorbitant amounts for their housing and food, and they barely make a profit off of what the work they've done. And then it all shuts down and it's gone because you've extracted the resource, and that's it. And that's very much not what we want to do, right? So I think it's just having a little bit more foresight and thinking, okay, how is this going to affect all of the sort of layers around us, and how can we make that ripple effect positive instead of negative? And in a lot of cases, it can be positive without hurting yourself at all. I mean, it just doesn't have to be eat or be eaten. Sometimes we can all be vegetarian.
Let me come back to something else that you mentioned, which is, and you just alluded to there, which is that with a scale of projects, I remember when you and I were doing our prep call, you were talking about, how these large projects act as real market makers. They create the market for local skills and talent. They create the market for a more local supply chain. Can you sort of map that out? So you mentioned like wind turbines being one example. What other things are you seeing building up, or what potential is there to build up around some of these truly large scale projects?
Well, I think, like blades, nacelles. There's going to be, I think, a lot of different places in the world that are making solar panels. Right now, I think China has 90% of that market, and there are a number of different players that are actually working on producing at scale and being competitive in that area and willing to localize it. So even if it's, say, I don't know, even if it's a Reliance in India is doing it right now, they're making solar panels. They would still be willing to make the solar panels on site next to a large project. And then you have a cheaper project and you have more competition, more competitive options. You don't have just one supplier in the world. So I think that's one example of other things that you can do on site. But there's quite a few of what you need to produce. A lot of things that need to be assembled. A lot of things just essentially need a dedicated facility. So it's at this point not as much rocket science as and so I think it's quite possible to have lots of different industries, and then there'll be other projects that are similar to ours, in fact, that they can help to provide for. So if any smaller projects are set up in Oman, which there will be other projects, they might not be able to get an entire dedicated facility for them, but maybe one of the ones set up for us can also start supplying to other projects in country. So we can help to bring the costs down, sort of, for our project, but then also generally for the whole market. And I think that helps everybody. It helps even the companies. They want to charge less. They can if they can make enough, and they will. I mean, it's not in their interest to just make 2 electrolyzers a year. They want to do more, but they need to have the demand side to do it. So by working together, you can actually, everybody does better.
Mm. And then the kind of products that these green electrons can be converted to. I know, again, when we talked about it, and on your site, it talks about green chemicals and fuels, and is that all on site?
We sort of have the upstream, which is the wind and solar. And in all of our cases, all of the projects, we have that diurnal profile, and you have the wind at night and you have the sun during the day, but essentially it's all over the site. And just to give you an example, when we say the site is so big, I mean, it is really big, but we're not covering it. We're using like say 4% footprint on that whole 7,000 square kilometers, because each wind turbine is 5 kilometers apart. So you'll have rows 5 kilometers apart, and then each turbine is maybe 1 kilometer from the next inside the row. So you could be standing somewhere maybe and see maybe 2 wind turbines at once, but you're not going to see rows and rows of them because they're so far apart, actually. And you can do almost anything in between. So you can still have, animals. You can still have mining. You can still have lots of activities that happen in between the turbines, as long as it's just not other turbines that interfere with the wake. So that's the upstream. Then the downstream is located closer to the port, or wherever you're going to export out from. You can use hydrogen. You can actually make hydrogen on site up at the upstream, and you can send it via cables to an industrial user. And in some cases, we have industrial users that can take hydrogen that way. And that's a good way to actually store the hydrogen because you can control, the pressure. And that whole length of sort of cabling is a good way to store it. Or you can take the hydrogen and you can turn it into other useful items that can actually be shipped more easily. So for our first phases, we are most likely doing mostly ammonia. And that is using the Haber-Bosch methodology to take the hydrogen, take nitrogen from the air, and then to put them together, you have NH3, so you have ammonia. And then we ship that out straight from sort of the downstream is straight at the port, essentially, and is very close to the port. So you ship out. And that's sort of the trajectory that our first phases will take. Now, going forward in our later phases, if we have a source of carbon, then we can make aviation synfuels, for instance, kind of like a kerosene type product. So that would be, net zero. It wouldn't be zero, but it's the best we're really going to get for long distance aviation. And it's very similar to methanol. So, you can store it at ambient temperatures very easily. But yeah, ammonia is definitely our first phase for all of the projects, if not, later phases. And if technology provides, if we can ship hydrogen directly, liquefied hydrogen more easily, more cheaply, at a warmer temperature, things happen, we are obviously can change and those later phases can have different technologies. But right now, from our viewpoint, the least expensive thing that makes the most sense is ammonia. And that's also what people are looking to buy and are making their plans around. So.
And then a sort of a slightly different question. So you mentioned that on the Amman project, obviously it was the sovereign wealth connection that got that moving. In Western Australia and in other projects that we're looking at, there'll be both sovereign wealth, but also fully commercial entities. So I'm just wondering, how do those different types of investors, what do they make of the long-term view that you bring to your projects, which again is a difference, I guess, due to scale, but a difference to the project?
Well, I think infrastructure has always been very long-term anyway. So, infrastructure investors are different from typical private equity investors who are looking for, at most have a 10 to 12-year fund and are looking for a 5-year turnaround on their investment. Infrastructure investors, some of them, they want to hold on forever. They would like to hold on and just have, kind of an annuity coming from this investment. And for them, and this is a lot of sovereign wealth funds in the world, they need to move their capital from fossil fuel companies to green companies. And it's very hard for them to move $1 trillion into 20 megawatt wind projects. This is not very easy. And thankfully, another just which dovetails really well in it, but it's also just wonderful. ESG is becoming more important to all of these investors as well. And if you think about it, it makes sense because these investors are holding on to people's their life, their long-term life support, essentially. These are their pensions. These are supposed to support them when they're no longer working. And I think that the realization that it's not just the money that people need, but they might need to have clean air to breathe. And it might also be good to not have, wars because people fighting over resources. I think there's an understanding that everyone's everyone's health or wellness is bettered by thinking about all of these ESG factors. And if anyone is going to think about them, it's going to be these sort of sovereign wealth type entities because they are interested in more than just returns. They're interested in the health and wellness of their citizens, right? This is also part of what they're concerned with. And so there's been a giant movement, and I think it's fantastic. I mean, if you look at all of and not even just sovereign wealth, look at BlackRock, huge investors that are very interested in long-term thinking, in ESG around all three areas, not just the environment, but it also very specifically moving into something that will decarbonize, that will actually solve the global warming problem that we face, the very existential problem. I think the appetite is there for these investors. So of course there are some investors that don't care, but those won't be our investors.
A last question then. We've sort of talked about where a couple of your projects have got to and where they're sitting at this moment in time. What's coming up for you in the next few years? Like, where do you imagine the portfolio of projects will go? You know, let's say by 2030. What's the kind of short to medium term ambition that you guys have?
Well, by 2030, all of them are in progress, right? So by 2030, we're delivering product, we're in construction, we're producing, we're maybe starting on the second phase. And this part is where our pricing is super competitive to any other form. So blue or gray versions of hydrogen or ammonia. I mean, I think 2030 is fantastic. I think by that time, it's really taking off to where people know they have this alternative to rely on so they can actually plan for it. Because I think it's quite hard for companies to plan to decarbonize when there's almost no products for them to buy. And I got a call from Cathay Pacific, actually, asking for syn fuels. And this, I didn't even know airlines were going to be looking at this so soon. But they have targets and they have almost no control over how they get their fuel, because if whatever airport you land at, you get whatever that airport has. And if they have a little bit of biofuel there, then well, you might have a little bit of reduction. But you really need you need to have a holistic, like the whole world basically has to reduce in order to make a big impact. And I think that by 2030, we're getting there to where people have these alternatives. They have everywhere they go, every ship in every port has an alternative, which means that they can buy those ships, they can plan for that, they can do all that's necessary to actually make the right choice. Whereas right now, it's quite hard, even if you have the best intentions. So I'm really looking forward to that day when everyone can make the good choices.
Thank you, Alicia. I mean, really fascinating to hear about the work you're doing. And I'm always struck on these conversations by the kind of how this breadth of experience that people bring to this kind of, I mean, I know it's a huge challenge, obviously, decarbonization and climate management, but it's so fascinating seeing different kinds of backgrounds being applied to solving different aspects of it. And I think this is a great example with you and your co-founders.
Oh, thanks for having me. But I must say, our team is amazing, and a lot of that breadth and a lot of that experience and that deep bench of knowledge is coming from a great team. It is incredible what you can do with all the overlapping different viewpoints and experience sets. It's been fantastic.
Thank you, Alicia. Many thanks for listening to the Decarb Connect podcast. We work with clients across the industrial sectors, specifically those who are tasked with decarbonising the most energy-intensive products and materials that we use every day. If you have an interest in learning more about either our members network, our reports, or our event series, do get in touch with us at decarbconnect.com. Or if you'd like to take part in the podcast, email me, Alex, at ac@decarbconnect.com. Thanks for listening.